The transmission came without warning. I was sitting at my console on Relay Station Vayath, finishing a routine report on trade signal delays, when every screen in the room went white at the same moment. Not a flicker. Not a glitch. A full override. The kind of system interrupt that the station's own engineers had told me was theoretically impossible without a council-level authorization code. I had been stationed on Vayath for 2 years. I had seen a lot of strange things in that time. I had never seen anything like this. The screen stayed white for exactly 4 seconds. Then the council seal appeared. It was enormous, projected across every surface in the relay room, a symbol I had learned to read the way a person learns to read weather. Today it carried something I had never seen in it before. A thin red border. Emergency broadcast. Mandatory reception. I set down my coffee. The voice that followed was that of Council Arbiter Sorvael, a tall, silver-scaled being whose species had sat at the head of the Galactic Council for 300 years. His voice was calm in the way that deep water is calm. Quiet on the surface, immovable underneath. He said that the Galactic Council had completed a comprehensive threat assessment of the human species. He said the assessment had been conducted over 18 months using the Council's most advanced analytical systems. He said the results were unanimous and unambiguous. He said the word that followed as though it meant nothing. The way a judge says guilty after the verdict is already decided. Tier 0 threat classification. I knew the term. Every human diplomat knew it. Tier 0 was a designation the Council had used exactly twice in its recorded history. The first time, the species in question had ceased to exist within a year. The second time, the species had complied with every Council demand within a week, and spent the next century as a client state, with no military, no sovereignty, and no voice at the table. Sorvael continued. The Council was offering humanity a structured compliance window of 30 standard days. During those 30 days, humanity was expected to do 3 things. First, dismantle and decommission all faster-than-light capable vessels and provide verification footage to Council inspectors. Second, surrender all military-grade artificial intelligence cores to designated Council collection points. Third, reduce the active human population across all colonies to a threshold the Council would specify in a follow-up communication. He paused after that third point. I think he expected the pause to land with weight. It did, but not in the way he intended. He said that failure to comply fully and within the window would result in what he called a corrective action. He did not describe what that meant. He did not need to. The Council's corrective actions were part of galactic history. They left no room for interpretation. The screens returned to normal. I sat completely still for a long time. The relay room was empty. I was the only human on shift at that hour, and the non-human staff had already quietly stepped away from their stations the moment the broadcast began. Whether out of respect or discomfort, I could not tell. Either way, I was alone with what I had just heard. I played the transmission again. I did not do it because I thought I had misunderstood. I played it again because some part of me needed to confirm that the words I had heard were real. That this was not a technical error, not a test, not some simulation the station ran for diplomatic staff. That the most powerful governing body in the known galaxy had just told my species, in plain language, to cut itself down to an acceptable size, or be removed entirely. The second time through, I noticed something I had not caught on the first listen. Sorviel's voice, at the very end of the message, carried a faint shift in tone. It was not relief. It was not reluctance. It was something closer to satisfaction. The kind a person feels when they have been waiting a long time to say something and have finally said it. That was the moment I understood that this had not been a sudden decision. This had been planned. The council had thought about this for a long time, had built toward this moment, had chosen the wording and the timing and the conditions with care. The 30-day window was not generosity. It was theater. They expected humanity to fold immediately. I opened a priority channel to Earth Command. It took 11 seconds to connect, which was fast. That told me they had been waiting. The face that appeared on my screen was Commander Owen Garrett, the head of Earth's Diplomatic Communications Division. He was a steady man, in his mid-50s, with gray at his temples, and the kind of eyes that had seen enough not to panic easily. Right now those eyes were very still. He said, "We heard it. Calvin." My name is Calvin Marsh. I had been Earth's observer on Vaoth for 2 years. I had filed hundreds of reports, attended hundreds of briefings, and spent 2 years learning to read alien body language, alien politics, alien priorities. I had done all of it so that humanity would have warning if something like this ever happened. It had happened, and I had not warned anyone, because there had been nothing to warn about. The council had kept this entirely secret. I told Owen I had no advance indication. I told him the broadcast had hit every human channel simultaneously, which meant the council had already mapped our full communications grid before they made the announcement. That was not something they did casually. That required preparation. That required intent. Owen nodded slowly. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that I would think about for a long time afterward. He said, "What's your read on the room out there?" I thought about it. I told him the non-human staff on the station had stepped away during the broadcast. I told him the council representatives I could see through the relay room windows were going about their work as though nothing had happened. I told him that was not indifference. That was confidence. They did not expect any of this to be complicated. Owen said, "How long have you got before someone comes to check on you?" I had a formal diplomatic briefing with Council Liaison Coordinator Dreveth in about 4 hours. That was the earliest I would be expected to interact with anyone from the council side. I was technically in my standard reporting window, which meant I had time. Owen said, "Good. Stay put. Stay calm. File your normal morning report like nothing happened. We will reach out to you through the standard channel in 2 hours. What is Earth going to do? He did not answer right away. He looked off to the side of the screen for a moment, the way a person does when they are choosing words carefully. Then he looked back at me and said the thing that I had not expected him to say. He said, "We'll need 30 days. The channel closed. I sat with those 4 words for a while. There was something in the way he had said them that did not match the way the council had intended the 30 days to be used. The council had offered 30 days as a window for surrender. Owen had taken those same 30 days and spoken about them as though they were something else entirely. As though they were enough time. Enough time for what? I did not yet know. I pulled up the morning report template. My hands moved through the familiar motions. I filled in signal traffic numbers, relay diagnostic readings, routine interstellar communication logs. I wrote 2 paragraphs about minor schedule adjustments for the following week. I submitted the report at exactly the time I always submitted it. Then I got up, walked to the small canteen at the end of the corridor, made myself a second cup of coffee, and returned to my desk. Outside the viewport, the stars looked exactly the same as they always did. Cold, distant, indifferent. The galaxy did not care what had just happened. The galaxy was enormous beyond any meaningful comprehension. And somewhere inside it, a group of beings who had decided they were the authority on what was and was not allowed to exist, had just pointed at my species and said, "Its time was up." I thought about my family back on Earth. My sister and her 2 children in Leeds. My father in Edinburgh, retired now, spending his mornings in his garden. I thought about the colonies I had read reports about, the settlements on Kepler 442b, the mining operations out near Tau Ceti, the research stations and the farms and the schools full of children who had been born under alien skies and knew no other home. I thought about all of that, and then I put it somewhere quiet in the back of my mind, because thinking about it too loudly was not going to help anything right now. What was going to help was staying exactly where I was, doing exactly what I was supposed to do, and trusting that the 4 words Owen Garrett had just said to me meant something real. We'll need 30 days. Not we don't know what to do. Not we need to think about this. Not we need to think about this. I opened a blank document and began writing notes. Not for a report, just for myself. Things I had noticed. Things I knew about the station layout, the council staff routines, the communication protocols, the blind spots in the relay room's external sensor array. Things that might or might not be useful, depending on what the next 30 days turned out to mean. I worked quietly for the next hour and a half. When the priority channel opened again, it was not Owen's face on the screen. It was someone I did not recognize. A young woman, dark-haired, serious-eyed, who introduced herself as Lieutenant Sandra Cole, Earth Command Strategic Division. She said she was going to be my point of contact for the duration. She said Owen had been reassigned to a different task. She did not say what task. She said, "From this point on, your job is to be exactly what they think you are." I asked what she thought they thought I was. She said, "A diplomat. A small one." On a quiet station. I said I understood. She said, "I need you to hear me clearly. What happens over the next 30 days is going to depend partly on you being very good at being boring." I told her I had been practicing that for 2 years. For the first time since the broadcast, I almost felt something close to steady. She said she would be in touch. The channel closed. I finished my coffee. I checked the clock. I had about 2 hours before my meeting with Dravath. I straightened my desk, reviewed my notes one more time, and then closed the document and filed it somewhere the station's systems would not flag. Outside the viewport, the stars were still there, still cold, still distant, but the 30 days had already started. In ways I did not yet understand, something was beginning. I was good at appearing calm. It was possibly the most useful skill I had developed in 2 years on Vayoth. The ability to sit across from a council representative, listen to something that made my internal temperature rise considerably, and respond with the measured tone of a person who was not particularly troubled. Dravath tested that skill within the first 4 minutes of our meeting. He was a council liaison coordinator, which meant his official function was to facilitate communication between council member species and observer personnel like me. He was tall, with a pale green complexion and 4 upper arm limbs that he used with a kind of fluid efficiency. He was also, in my professional assessment, someone who had never been wrong about anything in his life, and had arranged his personality around that fact. He opened the meeting by offering me a brief summary of the broadcast, as though I might have missed it or failed to grasp its significance. He said it in the tone of a person explaining something obvious to a child. He said the council had been concerned about humanity's expansion rate for some time, and had decided that a formal structure was necessary for everyone's benefit. I nodded. He said the compliance window was generous by historical standards. He mentioned, with what I can only describe as gentle emphasis, that the Yaravath species had complied in 11 days. He mentioned the Drovanai, who had surrendered their fleet within a week and were now, in his words, thriving members of the galactic community. I nodded again. He said, "We expect the process will be straightforward for your people as well." I said, "I'll pass that along." He seemed satisfied with that. He moved on to administrative matters, schedule changes, a maintenance window on the station's primary relay array. I took notes. I asked 2 minor questions about signal routing protocol. I left the meeting 17 minutes later, having given him absolutely nothing to think about. Back at my desk, I sat quietly for a moment and allowed myself to feel exactly how much I disliked that conversation. Then I put it away and got back to work. Sandra's communication that evening came through the standard channel, embedded in what looked like a routine technical update. The actual message was short. She said Earth's manufacturing networks had gone to continuous operation. She said deep space relay buoys along 6 approach vectors had been switched to passive mode, which meant they were still functioning but no longer broadcasting position data to council monitoring systems. She said a significant portion of Earth's outer system fleet had changed course, and was now on trajectories that did not appear in any registered navigation log. She ended the message by saying, "Keep watching the room, especially what they're not worried about." That last line stayed with me. I started paying closer attention to the council staff on Vayoth. Not in any obvious way. I had been there long enough that my routines were unremarkable. I walked the same corridors at the same times. I ate in the same sections of the canteen. I attended the same weekly coordination briefings and filed the same category of reports. But I watched. What I noticed over the next several days was a particular quality of relaxation in the council staff that I found interesting. Not complacency, exactly, Something more like certainty. They were not watching humanity closely because they did not feel they needed to. They had made the announcement. The window was open. The result, in their understanding, was not in question. I had read enough history to know why they believed that. Every species that had ever received a Tier 0 classification had done one of two things: complied immediately or resisted briefly before the resistance collapsed. No species had ever used the compliance window as anything other than a surrender timeline. The Council had no frame of reference for what humanity might be using it as instead. The language was technical, disguised as maintenance scheduling data, but I had learned to read her syntax. What she was telling me was that 3 new construction installations had come online in the asteroid belt. She was telling me that Earth's AI research division had completed something she called a distributed coordination architecture. She was telling me that volunteer recruitment across the colonies had exceeded projections by a significant margin. Volunteer recruitment. People were signing up. Not because they had to, because they chose to. Not because they had to assist you with our voice services. People who had heard that broadcast and understood exactly what it meant were raising their hands and saying, "Here, I am here." I thought about that for the rest of the day. On day 9, the Wrath stopped by my desk unannounced. He said it was a casual visit. Just checking in, making sure I had everything I needed. I offered him a seat and a drink, which he declined. He stood near the viewport and looked out at the stars the way a person looks at something they consider their own. He said, "We've been monitoring your home system's communication traffic. Quite a bit of internal chatter. That's normal, we find. Your people are processing." I said, "It's a lot to process." He said, "Understandably. He paused. We've found that the processing period typically resolves within the first week. After that, the practical work of compliance tends to begin, I said. I'm sure that's been true, he said. Is your government making progress? I said. I've been told they're working through the details. He seemed satisfied with that. He said, Good. It will go smoothly. These things always do. After he left, I sat quietly for a moment. I thought about the phrase he had used. These things always do. There was something in it that was not cruelty. It was something quieter, and in some ways more unsettling. It was the absolute, unshakable belief that the outcome was already determined, that what he was watching unfold was a process he had seen before, a familiar pattern, and that my species was simply the latest entry in a long list. He had never once considered that he might be wrong. I filed my daily report. Routine traffic. The council station began receiving what appeared to be routine commercial traffic from human-registered freight vessels in the outer system. I noticed it because it triggered a minor flag in the relay logs, a slight increase in encrypted packet volume across shipping frequencies. Normally I would not have thought twice about it, but Sandra had told me to watch what they were not worried about. They were not worried about commercial freight traffic. I looked more carefully at the encrypted packet patterns. But I had spent 2 years watching this relay system function, and I knew its rhythms. The packets were not following freight rhythms. They were following something else, something that looked, to an unpracticed eye, like shipping logistics, but that moved in a pattern I could not quite name. I documented what I observed in detail, and routed it through Sandra's channel at my next scheduled update window. Her reply came back 6 hours later. It said, "Good eyes. Don't look at it again." Whatever that traffic represented, the fact that I had spotted it meant I was too close to it now. The smartest thing I could do was leave it alone, and let it continue unobserved. I stopped looking at the freight logs. I had dinner with a council communications officer named Veth, a being of the Silari species who had always been reasonably friendly toward me, who, unlike Dreveth, did not seem to think talking to me was a charity exercise. We ate together occasionally. Veth was the kind of person who was genuinely curious about other species, and our conversations were usually pleasant. That evening, Veth seemed thoughtful in a way I had not seen before. Halfway through the meal, he said something unexpected. He said, "Calvin, can I ask you something?" I said, "Of course." He said, "Is your government going to comply?" I looked at him. He was watching me with an expression I could not entirely read. Not suspicious. Something more like careful. I said, "I believe they're working through the window as it was offered." Veth was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I have been with the council for a long time. I have seen these situations before. Not many times, but enough. And I have noticed something. The species that comply, there is a particular way they communicate during the window. A particular quality of signal traffic. Lots of internal administrative coordination, decommissioning logistics, population registry updates." Your signals don't have that quality. I held his gaze and said nothing. He said, I'm not going to report that. I want you to know that. He looked down at his food. I'm just telling you because I think you should know that not everyone in that chamber is as certain as Sorvale sounds. I thought about that for the rest of the meal. I said very little. When we parted, Veth gave me a small, unreadable nod, and I returned it, and we went our separate ways. I did not include that conversation in my daily report. On day 18, Sandra's update contained a phrase I had not seen before. The phrase was a human idiom she had not used in any of her previous messages. She wrote it at the end of an otherwise technical communication, almost as an afterthought. The phrase was, all the pieces are on the board. I read it twice. Then I understood something that I had been feeling without being able to name it. The reason Earth had asked for 30 days was not because 30 days was the minimum time needed for whatever they were doing. It was because 30 days was the time the Council had offered. Earth had simply taken exactly what was given and used every second of it. I was not a decoy because I was unimportant. I was a decoy because I was exactly important enough. My presence on this station, my routine reports, my calm meetings with Dravath, my dinners with Veth, my completely ordinary diplomatic existence, was the most valuable thing I could contribute right now. Every day that the Council watched me file a routine report was a day they spent not looking somewhere else. I thought about Sandra's early words to me. Your job is to be exactly what they think you are. I had been doing that. I had been very good at it. Date for the fleet decommissioning process. He said it with the same practiced calm he always used, but there was something underneath it now, a faint tightening, a small increase in the precision of his phrasing, that told me the Council's certainty was still holding, but had perhaps become slightly more deliberate. I said I would pass the request along to Earth Command and expect a response within 48 hours. He said that would be acceptable. I sent the request to Sandra's channel immediately afterward. Her reply came back in 3 hours, which was faster than usual. She confirmed that I should tell Dravath a formal response was being prepared and would be transmitted through official diplomatic channels before day 25. The response, when it arrived on day 24, was written in precise, formal Council language. It acknowledged the inspection team's readiness. It said that Earth's government was finalizing internal coordination and would be in contact regarding scheduling within the final days of the compliance window. It expressed appreciation for the Council's patience. It said nothing that was not true. Dravath read it and seemed reassured. He thanked me for facilitating the exchange. He said the process was proceeding normally. I said I was glad to hear that. After he left, I sat at my console and looked at the stars outside for a long time. Day 25. Day 26. Day 27. The station moved through its routines. The Council staff moved through theirs. I moved through mine. But on day 27, I noticed that two of the council's senior communications analysts had begun pulling extra shifts. They were not assigned to anything I could identify. Their duty logs showed only internal review tasks, the kind of notation that could mean almost anything. I watched them without appearing to watch them. They were focused. They were looking at something with a concentration that had not been there before. I could not tell what it was, but I knew what it felt like. It felt like the early stages of something not going the way it was supposed to go. I sent Sandra a single line. "The room is getting quieter." Her reply came back in 2 hours. It said, "We know. Stay steady." Day 28 passed. On the morning of day 29, I woke up early, made my coffee, and sat at my console. I opened my daily report template and began to type. Routine traffic volumes. Signal variance within normal parameters. No anomalies. I submitted the report at the usual time. Then I sat back, held my coffee in both hands. To feel the full weight of what the next 24 hours were about to bring. I did not know exactly what Earth had built in those 29 days. I knew pieces of it, fragments relayed through Sandra's careful messages. But the full picture was something I had been kept away from deliberately, because the less I knew, the less I could give away. And I had given away nothing. All the pieces are on the board. I thought about my father in his garden, my sister's children, the volunteers across the colonies who had raised their hands. I finished my coffee. I had one more day of being boring. I had walked past the council's main communications chamber hundreds of times without stopping. It was a large, circular room 3 corridors from the relay bay, lined with monitoring stations and display screens showing real-time data feeds from across the gray station. I was not supposed to have access to it, but I had long ago identified the 3-minute window each morning, when the overnight staff cleared out and the day shift had not yet arrived. On the morning of day 29, I used that window. I did not enter the room. I stood near the doorway and looked at the screens for 60 seconds. What I saw was not unusual on the surface. Standard sensor data, fleet position markers, communication traffic summaries. The kind of information that flowed through a station like Vayoth constantly. If you did not know what you were looking at, it looked like noise. I knew what I was looking at. 3 of the outer system monitoring arrays that should have been showing green status indicators were showing amber. Not red, not alerts. Amber. The kind of status that a technician might notice and add to a review queue for later in the day. Something to be looked at when there was time. Something that probably had a routine explanation. I backed away from the doorway before anyone saw me, and walked back to my desk at a normal pace. I sent Sandra a single coded line. disguised in my morning report as a formatting note about signal timestamp accuracy. The line said, 3 Eastern arrays showing amber status as of 0630. No alerts flagged. Her reply came back in 40 minutes. It said, noted. Nothing else. I sat at my desk and worked through the morning. I processed 2 incoming communication requests from minor council member species, both of them asking routine questions about human trade signal schedules. I answered both with the same measured tone I always used. I attended a brief administrative coordination call with station logistics staff. I filed a mid-morning update on relay traffic patterns. By mid-morning, 4 amber indicators had become 6. I knew because Dreveth's assistant came to find me at 11, which was not a scheduled time for any contact. She was a small, quick-moving being named Oren who I had always found pleasant, and today she looked like someone who had been told to appear pleasant, and was working hard at it. She said that Dreveth would like a brief word when I had a moment. She said he was in the secondary briefing room when I was ready. I said I would be right there. Dreveth was standing when I entered, which was unusual. He was usually seated. Standing made him look taller, which I suspected was deliberate. He said hello, and offered me a seat. And I sat, and he did not. He said, Calvin, we've been reviewing your morning report. I said, is there a concern? He said, your outer system traffic numbers are slightly lower than the previous 3 days. I can run a secondary check on the relay logs if that would help. It's possible there's a calibration variance on the eastern array. I noticed a minor status flag this morning, but nothing that looked significant. He looked at me for a moment. I held his gaze in the easy, slightly tired way of a person who had been doing this job for 2 years and found calibration variances somewhat tedious. He said, yes, that would be helpful. I said I would have a supplemental report ready by end of day. He said that was fine. He said something else, almost as I was leaving. He said, Calvin, has Earth Command given any indication of when we can expect their formal communication regarding the decommissioning schedule? I turned back and said, the last update I received indicated they were finalizing the language. I expect to have something for you today. He nodded. He looked, for the first time in 29 days, like a person who was paying close attention. I went back to my desk and wrote a supplemental relay calibration report that was detailed, technically accurate, and explained the amber status indicators as a likely consequence of a scheduled maintenance cycle on the eastern array. Every word of it was true. None of it was the whole truth. I submitted it at 2 in the afternoon. I knew because I was watching the station's public access engineering dashboard, which was not restricted. It was the kind of screen that station maintenance staff checked as a matter of course, the kind that nobody thought about until something on it changed. 3 more arrays had shifted status. I did not send Sandra a message about it. I suspected she already knew. At 4 in the afternoon, Veth found me in the canteen. He was not there for a meal. He came in, saw me, crossed to my table, and sat down without asking. He looked at me with the same careful expression he had used on day 15. He said, "How are you doing?" I said I was fine. I asked how he was. He said, "I've been asked to help review some anomalous sensor data." He paused. "The analysis team is having difficulty categorizing it." And I want you to hear it as something said between 2 people who have eaten dinner together several times, and who I believe understand each other reasonably well. I said, "Of course." He said, "Whatever is happening right now, it is happening on a scale that is making people in that room very uncomfortable. Not all of them. Sorvael's people are still confident, but the technical staff are not." I said nothing. He said, "I think you know more about what's happening than you are able to tell me." I said, "Veth, I am an observer diplomat on a relay station. I file reports and attend meetings." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "I know." He stood up. "I hope things go the way they need to go." He left the canteen. I sat with my drink for several minutes. I thought about what he had said. Things go the way they need to go. Not the way the council wanted. Not the way the compliance window was designed to produce. The way they needed to go. I received a direct channel request from Earth Command, not from Sandra. From Owen Garrett. Owen looked exactly as he had looked on day 1. Steady. Eyes quiet. The gray at his temples slightly more prominent under the channel's lighting. He said, "Calvin, how are you holding up?" I said I was fine. I asked how things were on his end. He said, "Busy." He paused. We're about 18 hours out. I wanted to talk to you directly before the window closes. I said I appreciated that. He said, "You've done good work out there. The kind that doesn't get talked about much because if it had gone wrong, nobody would have known you were doing it. But it didn't go wrong. So I want you to know that we noticed." I said, "Thank you, Owen." He said, "There's one more thing I need you to do." At 0700 tomorrow, station time, you'll receive a formal diplomatic transmission from Earth Command. It will be addressed to Council Arbiter Sorvale through the official observer channel. I need you to route it through your relay console personally and confirm delivery. I said I understood. He said, "Your job is to stay at your desk, remain calm, and document everything you observe. What you see in the next few hours after that transmission is going to be historically significant. Your observations are going to matter." I said I would be ready. He looked at me through the screen for a moment. He said, "You know, when we first placed you on Vayath, I wasn't sure you were senior enough for the posting. You were younger than I would have liked, less experienced in high-pressure diplomatic situations." I said, "That assessment turned out to be correct." He paused. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's a long day." The channel closed. I sat at my console for a while after that. The station was moving into its night cycle, lights dimming in the corridors, traffic in the public areas thinning. The relay room was quiet. The screens showed their usual patterns of data, flowing and constant, the endless stream of signals that connected the galaxy. The stars were the same as they had always been, but 9 of the eastern monitoring arrays were now showing amber, and the analysis team 2 corridors away was working late, and somewhere in the outer system, in places the Council's sensors were no longer reliably reporting on, something that had been built in 30 days of continuous operation was in 20 position. I thought about the young woman at the colony school on Kepler 442b, who had been born under an alien sun, and had never seen Earth, and called herself human with the easy confidence of someone who had never needed to justify it. I thought about the volunteers. I thought about the word Sandra had used once, and only once, embedded in a message so technical it almost slid past me. She had called it a response. Not a defense, not a counterattack. A response. The distinction mattered. I set an alarm for 5:30. I lay on my bunk in the dim quiet of the station's night cycle, and stared at the ceiling for a while. Then, eventually, I slept. I woke at 5:20, 10 minutes before my alarm. I made coffee. I sat at my console. I opened my daily report template. At 0700 exactly, the transmission from Earth Command came through. I routed it personally, as Owen had asked. I confirmed delivery through the official observer channel, with full diplomatic authentication. I flagged the transmission in the station's public diplomatic log. Then I sat back and waited. The transmission reached Council Arbiter Sorvale's office at 0704. I knew because the station's diplomatic receipt system registered the confirmation at that time. I watched the clock. The station's general alert system produced a sound I had never heard before. A low, sustained tone that I later learned was designated for high-priority council operational alerts. Not an emergency alarm. Something more deliberate. Something used when the situation required coordinated attention across all departments. The council chamber on Relay Station Vayath was not designed for public viewing, but it was visible through a long observation window that ran along the upper corridor above the main diplomatic level. I had walked that corridor every day for 2 years without ever paying much attention to what was inside. It was usually quiet. Formal meetings, routine reviews, the steady administrative work of an institution that believed it was eternal. At 07:15 on day 30, it was not quiet. I walked to the observation window at a measured pace. I had my personal documentation unit with me, which was standard for any diplomatic observer. I stood at the window and I watched, and I wrote down what I saw. Council Arbiter Sorvail was at the head of the main table. He was surrounded by 6 senior council members, 3 communications officers, and a technical analyst who was transferring data from a portable console to the room's main display, with hands that were moving faster than I had ever seen council technical staff move. The display showed a map of the outer system. Or rather, it showed what the map used to look like, the monitoring grid that the council maintained across 6 deep space sectors, the network of observation arrays and relay buoys and sentinel platforms that had kept watch on human space for a long time, was showing large sections of black. Not amber, not red, black. No signal, no status, no data. I watched Sorvail look at that display for a long time without speaking. Then I watched him turn to his communications chief and say something I could not hear through the observation window glass. The communications chief responded. Sorvail turned back to the display. The black areas were not spreading. They were already there. The entire eastern monitoring grid had gone dark simultaneously. At 07:04, which was exactly when the diplomatic transmission from Earth Command had been confirmed as received. The timing was not a coincidence. It was a message inside a message. Earth had waited until the Council formally received the transmission before activating whatever had silenced the core grid. They had wanted the Council to be reading the words at the exact moment the outer system went quiet. I thought that was one of the most precise things I had ever witnessed. I continued documenting. At 07:22, a council senior administrator I knew by sight but not by name entered the chamber at a near run and placed a secondary data tablet in front of Sorvail. Sorvail looked at it. Something in his posture changed. Not dramatically. A small change, the kind that you would only notice if you had been watching him closely for almost a month. A faint tightening around the upper limbs. A stillness that was different from his usual stillness. His usual stillness was the stillness of certainty. This was something else. I noted it in my documentation. I described it as carefully as I could, because Owen had told me that what I observed was going to matter, and I believed him. Large enough for every person in the room to read simultaneously. I could read it too, from my position at the observation window. It was short. It identified itself as an official communication from Earth's Joint Command Authority, transmitted through certified diplomatic observer channels, and logged in the Galactic Council's own receipt system at 0704, station time. It said that Earth had reviewed the Council's ultimatum in full, and had considered it carefully over the 30-day window provided. It said that Earth declined all 3 conditions without exception. It said that the Council's ultimatum, including its threat of what it called corrective action, was considered under human law to constitute a formal declaration of hostile intent against the human species and all affiliated colonies. It said Earth had responded to that declaration accordingly. It said that the Council's Eastern monitoring grid had been deactivated in a coordinated operation beginning at 0704, station time, and would not be restored by Earth. The operation had been conducted using assets and methods that Earth was not required to disclose. It said that 6 Council border installations in sectors 4 through 9 had been placed under a communications blackout. Their personnel were unharmed. They would remain in that status until a diplomatic resolution was negotiated on terms acceptable to Earth. It said that Earth was prepared to discuss a new framework for human participation in galactic governance, one in which humanity's sovereignty, territorial boundaries, and population were treated as non-negotiable. "72 standard hours." It said, at the very end, in language that I found remarkable in its restraint, Earth has no interest in ongoing conflict. But Earth will not accept the terms offered. We are ready to talk. We are also ready for the alternative. That was all. I stood at the observation window and watched the council chamber absorb what it had just read. The silence in that room was unlike any silence I had observed in 2 years of watching council operations. It was the silence of people recalculating, of people who had built an entire understanding of a situation on a foundation they were only now discovering was not stable. Council Admiral Kareth, a tall and decorated military figure who I had seen in the chamber before, stood and said something loud enough that I caught fragments of it through the window glass. The word I understood most clearly was impossible. He said it in the way that people say words when the words are not quite keeping up with their thoughts. Sorviel said nothing for a long time. He looked at the display. He looked at the map with its sections of black. He looked at the transmission still visible on the secondary screen. Then he said something to his communications chief that I could not hear. The communications chief went to work immediately, sending outbound contact requests through multiple channels. Through 9. I watched the status indicators on the wall display. Each attempt returned the same result. No connection. I documented all of this. I wrote it down in order, with timestamps, in the clearest language I could use. At 0802, the council chamber's main display added a new data feed. It was coming from a monitoring platform in Sector 2, one of the few that was still active. And what it was showing was difficult to interpret from my position at the window, but I could